Have you ever wondered what a single act of honesty can do? Not to the world, but to someone's heart. If you believe small actions can spark miracles, stay with me till the end of this story. You'll see how one girl's honesty brought light into the life of a man who thought he'd lost his soul. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to see more stories like this. Maya didn't believe in luck. She believed in struggle. Every morning, she woke before the sun, tying her worn-out shoes, her hands already aching before her day had even begun. The alarm clock would buzz at 4:30, a harsh mechanical sound that jolted her from whatever restless sleep she'd managed to find. She would lie there for just a moment, staring at the water-stained ceiling of their tiny apartment, gathering the strength to face another day. Then she'd look over at her sister, Lila, still sleeping peacefully in the bed they shared. And that would be enough. That would always be enough. She worked as a waitress in a downtown cafe, small and noisy, always filled with impatient customers who rarely looked her in the eye. The cafe was called Marie's, tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store on a street that never quite woke up. The floors were sticky, the coffee was mediocre at best, and the owner, a gruff man named Harold, paid just above minimum wage and not a cent more. The morning shift started at 5, which meant Maya had to catch the earliest bus, the one that smelled like diesel, and carried night shift workers heading home and early morning cleaners heading to office buildings downtown. By 6, the cafe would start filling up. Construction workers ordering black coffee and breakfast sandwiches. Office workers grabbing lattes before their commute. Students nursing hangovers with greasy food. Maya learned all their orders, remembered their names, even when they didn't remember hers. She smiled through the exhaustion, through the rude comments, through the customers who'd snap their fingers at her like she was invisible. But none of that mattered, because when she went home each night, she had someone waiting for her. Her younger sister, Lila. Lila was 16, gentle and kind, but frail. She had been sick since she was a child, but everything changed 3 years ago. Maya's whole world revolved around her now. Every cent she earned, every hour she worked, was for Lila's medication. They lived in a tiny apartment with cracked walls, a flickering light bulb, and one small bed that they shared. It was a 4th-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better days decades ago. The radiator clanked and hissed, but barely produced heat in winter. The windows were drafty, sealed with duct tape that peeled away each season. The bathroom had mold in the corners that Maya scrubbed every week, fighting a battle she could never quite win. Their kitchen was a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a microwave that only worked on half power. But Maya had made it a home. She'd hung curtains she'd sewn herself from fabric she found at a thrift store. She'd painted the walls a soft yellow with paint she'd bought on clearance, covering up years of grime and neglect. She'd arranged their few possessions, books from the library, Lila's drawings, photographs of their parents, to make the space feel warm despite everything it lacked. On cold nights, Maya would pretend she wasn't freezing, just to tuck the blanket tighter around her sister. She'd lie there shivering, her breath visible in the air, and tell herself it wasn't that bad. She'd survived worse. They both had. But there was something Maya never told anyone. Something that ate at her every single day. 3 years ago, when Maya was only 17, she was driving them home from school. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of day where the sun sits low and golden, making everything look beautiful and peaceful. Maya had just gotten her license 6 months earlier. She was careful, always careful, but that day she was tired. She'd worked a double shift at a grocery store the night before, stocking shelves until 2 in the morning, then gone straight to school. She was running on 3 hours of sleep and too much cheap coffee. Lila was in the passenger seat, talking about her biology class, excited about a project on genetics. She wanted to be a doctor someday, wanted to help people the way the doctors had helped their mother during her final illness. Maya was listening, or trying to, but her eyes were so heavy. She remembered blinking, just for a second, maybe 2, just to rest them. That's when it happened. The truck came out of nowhere. Later, the police would say the driver had run a red light, that it wasn't Maya's fault, that there was nothing she could have done. But Maya knew better. She knew that if she'd been more alert, more focused, she might have seen it coming. She might have been able to swerve, to brake, to do something. The impact threw their car off the road. Maya remembered the sound of metal tearing, glass shattering, Lila's scream cutting off mid-breath. Then nothing. Just darkness and the distant sound of sirens. Maya walked away with bruises, a concussion, and 3 cracked ribs. Lila didn't. She spent 2 months in a coma, and when she woke up, her body was never the same. The doctors explained it all in careful, clinical terms. Traumatic brain injury, immune system dysfunction, chronic fatigue syndrome. Lila would need medication for the rest of her life, maybe more. Her body couldn't fight off infections the way it used to. Simple colds became pneumonia. Cuts took weeks to heal. She was fragile now, in a way she'd never been before. And every day since then, Maya carried that weight. The guilt, the knowledge that her sister's suffering was her fault. She'd been the one driving. She'd been the one who was tired. She'd been the one who closed her eyes for just a second. That's why she worked 3 jobs. That's why she never complained. That's why she could never, ever give up. In the mornings, she was at Marie's cafe. In the afternoons, she cleaned houses for a service that paid under the table. In the evenings, when she could find the work, she did data entry for a company that hired remote workers for pennies per task. She would sit at their tiny kitchen table, her fingers flying over the keys of a laptop she'd bought used for $50, entering numbers and addresses until her eyes burned. She slept 4, maybe 5 hours a night. She ate 1 meal a day, usually something cheap and filling, rice and beans, pasta with butter, whatever was on sale. She gave everything else to Lila. The fresh fruit, the vegetables, the protein. Lila needed to stay strong, needed to fight off the constant threat of illness. Maya's friends from high school had all moved on. College, jobs in other cities, lives that didn't include checking on the girl who'd disappeared into a world of medical bills and survival. She didn't blame them. She'd disappeared into this life by choice, because there was no other option. Lila was all she had left, and she would do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep her sister alive. One night, after another long shift, Maya was walking home when it happened. It was late, past 11. The cafe had been busy, unusually so, and Harold had asked her to stay and help close. She'd agreed because she always agreed, because she couldn't afford to say no, because every extra hour meant another few dollars toward Lila's medication. She was exhausted, her feet aching in the cheap shoes she wore, the soles worn so thin she could feel every crack in the sidewalk. The streets were quiet, the streetlights humming softly. Most of the shops were closed, their windows dark. A few bars were still open, music and laughter spilling out onto the street. But Maya kept her head down and kept walking. This wasn't the best neighborhood, especially not at night, but she'd learned to be invisible. Don't make eye contact. Don't engage. Just get home. That's when she saw it. A black leather wallet lying on the ground near a parked car. A sleek black sedan that looked wildly out of place on this street. She picked it up, thinking someone must have dropped it, probably one of the people in the bar who'd had too much to drink. Inside, there were cards, documents, and a stack of $100 bills so thick she gasped. She had never seen that kind of money before, not in person, not all at once. Her hands trembled as she counted it. $3,000. $3,000 that someone had just dropped, just left lying on the street like it was nothing. For a moment, she froze. Her mind raced. That money could pay for Lila's next round of treatment, the antibiotics she needed for the infection that wouldn't quite clear up. It could pay their rent for 3 months. It could buy groceries, real groceries, not just rice and beans. It could give them breathing room, just for a little while. She sat on a nearby bench, clutching the wallet, staring at the bills. Her conscience screamed one thing. Her desperation screamed another. Just take a little, no one would know. Rich people lose money all the time. They don't even miss it. You need this. Lila needs this. But her heart said otherwise. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, something she'd said years ago when Maya was just a child. What isn't yours will never bring you peace, Mija. You can have all the money in the world, but if you got the wrong way, it'll rot inside you. Maya opened the wallet again, looking for some clue about who it belonged to. Behind the cash, she found credit cards, all with the same name. Ethan Cole. She found a driver's license with a photo of a handsome man in his 30s, serious eyes, no smile. And then she found a business card. The name read, Ethan Cole, CEO, Cole Enterprises. Her breath caught. She knew that name. Everyone did. Ethan Cole was a billionaire, one of the richest men in the state. She'd seen him on the news, read about him in the free newspapers people left on the bus. He was famous for being ruthless in business, cold and calculating. People said he had no heart, that he only cared about money and power. Still, Maya decided she couldn't keep it. She couldn't live with herself if she did. No matter how much she needed it, no matter how much it would help, it wasn't hers. Her mother had taught her better than that. She took the bus the next morning to his company building, using money she'd been saving for Lila's medication. The building was downtown, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the sky. Maya had never been in this part of the city before. Not really. The sidewalks were clean. The people wore suits and carried expensive briefcases. Everyone moved with purpose, with confidence, like they belonged. Maya felt like an intruder. She was wearing her work clothes, black pants, and a white shirt that had been washed so many times they were thin and faded. Her shoes were scuffed. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked exactly like what she was, someone who didn't belong here. The security guards at the front desk almost didn't let her in. They looked at her with suspicion, with barely concealed contempt. One of them, a large man with a bored expression, crossed his arms and blocked her path. "Can I help you?" he asked in a tone that suggested he very much did not want to help her. "I need to return something," Maya said quietly, holding up the wallet. "It belongs to Mr. Cole." The guard's expression changed, just slightly. He looked at the wallet, then at her, then back at the wallet. "You could have just kept it," he said bluntly. "Why bring it here?" "Because it's not mine," Maya said simply. The guard studied her for a long moment, then picked up a phone and called someone. After a brief conversation, he nodded. "Wait here. Someone will come down." Maya waited, standing awkwardly in the massive lobby with its marble floors and modern art on the walls. People walked past her, barely glancing her way, and she felt smaller and smaller. She almost left several times, almost just put the wallet on the desk and ran, but something made her stay. Finally, a woman in a sharp suit and heels that clicked on the marble floor approached her. She was elegant, professional, her hair in a perfect bun, her makeup flawless. "I'm Mr. Cole's executive assistant," she said, extending her hand. "I understand you have something for him." Maya handed over the wallet with both hands. "Please, tell him someone found this," she said softly. "I didn't take anything. Everything's still there." The assistant opened the wallet and quickly counted the cash. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You could have kept it," she said, echoing the guard's words. "There's a lot of money here." Maya smiled weakly, feeling tears prick her eyes though she didn't know why. "My mother always said, what isn't yours will never bring you peace." The assistant's expression softened, just a fraction. "Can I get your name? Mr. Cole might want to thank you." Maya shook her head. "That's not necessary. I just wanted to return it." She left before anyone could ask anything else, before they could see her hands shaking or the tears threatening to fall. She walked back out onto the street, into the noise and bustle of the city, and felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. She'd done the right thing. She knew that. But the right thing didn't pay for medication. The right thing didn't keep the lights on. When she got home, Lila was awake, reading on the couch. She looked up and smiled when Maya came in, that beautiful smile that made everything worth it. "How was work?" Lila asked. "Fine," Maya lied, hanging up her coat. "Same as always." She didn't tell Lila about the wallet, about the money she'd held in her hands and given away. What good would it do? It would only make Lila feel guilty, and she carried enough already. They both did. Hours later, when Ethan Cole received his wallet, he barely looked at it at first. He'd been expecting this. Another failure. Another person who kept it. Another confirmation that the world was as dark as he believed it to be. You see, Ethan had been doing something strange for the past 6 months. He'd been dropping wallets all over the city. Different amounts of money, different locations, different circumstances. He would leave them on park benches, in coffee shops, on the subway, on street corners. Then he'd track them, see what happened. Did people return them? Did they keep the money? Did they take just some of it, trying to justify their theft with partial honesty? He wanted to prove something to himself. That people were selfish. That the world was as dark as he believed it to be. That kindness was a lie we tell ourselves to feel better about our own moral failures. Because 5 years ago, Ethan Cole lost everything that mattered. His wife, Sarah. She was pregnant with their first child, a boy they were going to name Daniel. They'd spent months preparing, painting the nursery a soft blue, reading books about parenting, arguing playfully about whether they should use cloth or disposable diapers. Sarah had been so happy, glowing in that way pregnant women do. She would rest her hand on her belly and talk to Daniel, telling him about all the things they do together. Ethan would lie with his head against her stomach, feeling the baby kick, and think that he'd finally found what life was really about. They were driving home from a doctor's appointment, a routine checkup where they'd heard Daniel's heartbeat strong and steady, when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact was on Sarah's side of the car. She died instantly. So did their son. Ethan survived without a scratch. Not a broken bone, not a concussion, just some bruises that faded within a week. And that destroyed him more than any injury could. He remembered standing at their funeral, shaking hands with people who offered condolences that meant nothing. He remembered going home to their apartment, seeing the nursery they'd prepared, all those tiny clothes and toys and books for a child who would never exist. He remembered sitting on the floor of that room, holding a stuffed bear they'd bought, and feeling something inside him break so completely that he knew it would never heal. He threw himself into work after that. He became ruthless, cold, efficient. If he worked hard enough, long enough, he didn't have to feel anything. He didn't have to go home to an empty apartment. He didn't have to look at that nursery. He built his empire bigger and bigger, buying companies, firing employees, making decisions based purely on profit margins and quarterly reports. People started to fear him. That was fine. Better to be feared than pitied. He stopped believing in goodness, in kindness, in people. He wanted the world to prove him right, to confirm what he already knew, that it was just as ugly as he felt inside. That's why he started dropping the wallets. He needed proof. He needed data. He needed evidence that he was right to feel this way, that closing himself off from humanity wasn't cynicism but realism. Out of 20 wallets he dropped, only 2 had been returned. The rest had simply vanished, taken by people who saw an opportunity and seized it. Those 2 returns had bothered him, suggested that maybe he was wrong, but he'd explained them away. Maybe those people were wealthy enough not to need the money. Maybe they were afraid of getting caught. There had to be a rational explanation that didn't involve actual goodness. But then, when he opened his wallet that day, he noticed something. A small folded piece of paper tucked between the cards. It wasn't his. He opened it slowly, frowning. The note was written in neat, careful handwriting on the back of a receipt. It read, "I didn't take anything, but if you ever find this, please say a prayer for my sister. She's sick, and I wish I could do more for her. I only borrowed one of your business cards because I wanted to remember the day I chose honesty over desperation. I hope that's okay. My mother used to say that what isn't yours will never bring you peace. I think she was right." Below the note was the receipt itself, dated that same morning. It was from a pharmacy. The item purchased was a small bottle of generic painkillers. The total was $11.29. Ethan stared at the note for a long time, reading it again and again. His hand started shaking. Because those words, "I wanted to remember the day I chose," they reminded him of something Sarah used to say. She always said that our choices define us more than our circumstances, that we become good not by feeling good, but by doing good even when we don't feel like it. Something inside him, something he'd thought was dead and buried, stirred. He hadn't felt this in years. This sense that maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong about everything. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his king-size bed in his expensive apartment, surrounded by all the trappings of wealth, and felt more alone than ever. But it was a different kind of loneliness now. Before it had been numb, empty. Now it ached. Now it felt almost alive, like a part of him was waking up after being dormant for so long. He kept replaying those words. She'd been desperate enough to need $11 painkillers, but honest enough to return $3,000. She had a sick sister, but took time to write a note asking for prayers. She'd borrowed a business card, such a small thing, but had still acknowledged it, still asked if it was okay. Who was this person? What kind of life was she living? And why did her choice, her honesty, make him feel things he'd sworn never to feel again? For the first time in 5 years, Ethan felt something other than emptiness. He felt curiosity. He felt hope. He felt human. And it terrified him. The next day, Ethan did something he'd never done before. He called his head of security into his office and asked him to find out who returned his wallet. "I need to know who she is," Ethan said, handing over the note. Find her. His security chief, a former detective named Marcus, read the note and raised an eyebrow. This could take some time. We don't have much to go on. I don't care how long it takes, Ethan said firmly. Find her. It wasn't easy. The receptionist hadn't taken her name. The security footage showed a young woman in work clothes, but the image wasn't clear enough for facial recognition. But Marcus was good at his job. He started with the pharmacy receipt, traced it to a location on the south side of the city. He talked to the pharmacist, showed him the security footage from Cole Enterprises. The pharmacist remembered her, said she came in once or twice a week, always buying the cheapest medication available. From there, Marcus tracked her movements, cross-referenced bus routes, found a pattern. Within 2 days, they had an address. Apartment 4C in a building that looked like it should have been condemned years ago. Ethan went there himself. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, didn't bring security, didn't call ahead. He just drove across the city in his car, watching the neighborhoods change from prosperous to struggling to outright poor. He parked on the street, looking up at the building with its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. He climbed the 4 flights of stairs, each step creaking ominously under his weight. The hallways smelled like mildew and old cooking. He could hear televisions through thin walls, a baby crying somewhere, a couple arguing in Spanish. When he reached apartment 4C, he stood there for a moment, his hand raised to knock, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? What did he expect to accomplish? But he knocked anyway. Maya opened the door, and when she saw him, all the color drained from her face. She recognized him immediately from his driver's license, from the news, from the business card she'd kept. Mr. Cole, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I think you have something that belongs to me, he said gently, holding up the note. You returned my wallet. Maya swallowed hard, her eyes darting behind her, as if to make sure Lila wasn't listening. Ah, yes. I didn't mean for you, to. You shouldn't have come here. It's not necessary. I just did what anyone should do. You didn't take a cent, Ethan said, his voice softer than she expected. Why? Maya looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. Because I didn't earn it. It wasn't mine. You could have taken it. You clearly need it. He gestured to the apartment behind her, and Maya felt a flush of shame. Need doesn't make it right, she said quietly. My mother taught me that. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Ethan found himself studying her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself like she was ready to disappear at any moment. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 20, with dark hair pulled back and hands that looked rough from work. Then, from inside the apartment, a weak voice called, Maya, who's at the door? Ethan looked past her and saw Lila for the first time. She was lying on a couch wrapped in blankets, pale and fragile, her eyes large in her thin face. Something broke in him at the sight. This was the sick sister. This was why Maya worked herself to death, why she needed those cheap painkillers, why she'd returned $3,000 even though it could have changed their lives. He realized the truth then. This girl wasn't just honest. She was selfless in a way he'd forgotten existed. She had nothing, but she gave everything. She was drowning, but she never stopped swimming. Without saying another word, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope he'd prepared before coming here. Consider it thank you, he said, holding it out to her. Maya stared at the envelope, but didn't take it. I can't accept that. I didn't return your wallet for a reward. I know, Ethan said. That's why I'm giving it to you. Please, Maya said, her voice breaking slightly. I appreciate it, but I can't. It wouldn't be right. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Pride. Dignity. The kind of strength that comes from choosing to do right even when it costs you everything. What if I hire you then? He heard himself say. I need someone I can trust. Someone honest. Work for me. And consider this an advance on your salary. Maya's eyes widened. Mr. Cole, I don't. I'm not qualified for anything at your company. I didn't even finish high school. I'm just a waitress. I don't care about qualifications, Ethan said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. I care about character. And you have more of that than anyone I've ever employed. I have to take care of my sister, Maya said, glancing back at Lila. I can't commit to regular hours. I never know when she'll need me. Then work from home when you need to, Ethan said. We'll figure it out. Just, please, let me help. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to say no. Every instinct told her to say no, that accepting help from this man would complicate everything. But she looked back at Lila, at her sister who was getting thinner and paler every day despite everything Maya did, and she felt her resolve crumbling. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Ethan hesitated. He could tell her the truth, that he'd been testing humanity, and she'd passed in a way no one else had. That she'd reminded him of something he'd lost. That talking to her for these few minutes had made him feel more alive than he'd felt in 5 years. But he didn't say any of that. Because someone should, he said simply. Maya took the envelope with shaking hands. Later, when she opened it alone after Ethan had left, she found a check. It was enough to cover Lila's medication for a year. She cried that night, sitting on the floor of their tiny bathroom so Lila wouldn't hear, sobbing until she had no tears left. Not just because of the money, but because someone had finally seen her. Someone had finally understood. But Ethan didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary began to happen. Ethan found himself thinking about Maya and Lila constantly. He would be in meetings, supposed to be reviewing quarterly reports, and instead he'd think about that tiny apartment, those cracked walls, that girl who worked herself to exhaustion for his sister, who wasn't even her responsibility. He started making calls. He contacted specialists, the best doctors in the state, and asked about Lila's condition. They reviewed her medical records, records that Maya had reluctantly provided when Ethan offered to get a second opinion. The diagnosis was complicated, they said, but there were treatments available, better medications than what she was currently taking, therapies that could improve her quality of life. None of it was cheap, but all of it was possible. Ethan arranged for Lila to be moved to a better hospital. He quietly paid for everything, setting up accounts and trusts so that Maya couldn't refuse, so that the care would continue long after he was gone if necessary. He never asked for gratitude, never demanded recognition. He just did it, and then he started visiting them. At first, it was just to check on Lila's progress, but he found himself staying longer each time. He'd sit in Lila's hospital room, this bright space so different from their dark apartment, and talk with them, not about business or money or anything important. Just talk. About books Lila was reading, about funny things that happened at Maya's job, about the weather and television shows, and all the mundane things that make up a life. The more time he spent around them, the more he realized how empty his own life had been. He had all the money in the world, but none of the warmth. His apartment was filled with expensive furniture, but it had never been a home. He went to his office every day, but he had no real friends, no one he could talk to about anything that mattered. Watching Maya care for her sister, seeing how she laughed despite everything, how she found joy in small things like a good meal or a funny joke, it reminded him what it meant to be human. She never complained. She never asked why this happened to her. She just loved her sister fiercely and did what needed to be done. Maya was different from anyone he'd ever met. She never treated him like he was special. She didn't care about his money or his power. She just treated him like a person. When he'd say something, she'd challenge him if she disagreed. When he'd make a joke, she'd laugh if it was funny and groan if it wasn't. She was real in a way no one in his world was real. One evening, they were sitting in Lila's hospital room. Lila had fallen asleep after dinner, exhausted from physical therapy, and Maya was knitting a scarf by the window. The sunset painted everything orange and gold. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said quietly, watching Maya's hands move with practiced efficiency. Maya looked up. "Sure. Why do you do all this? I've seen how hard you work. 3 jobs, barely any sleep. You're killing yourself for her." Maya's hands stopped moving. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Because it's my fault she's like this." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" And then she told him. About the accident. About that 1 second of distraction, that moment when she closed her tired eyes. About the truck and the impact, and waking up to find her sister in a coma. About the guilt that never left, that followed her every moment of every day. "I was driving," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was tired, and I closed my eyes, and now she has to live like this forever. How can I not do everything in my power to make it better?" Ethan listened, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "It wasn't your fault. The police report said the truck ran a red light. Even if you'd been completely alert, You might not have been able to avoid it. Accidents happen, Maya. They're terrible and unfair, and they destroy us. But they happen. And they're not always someone's fault. Maya shook her head. But if I hadn't been so tired, then maybe it still would have happened. Ethan interrupted gently. Or maybe something else would have happened some other day. You can't live your life in the world of what if. Trust me, I've tried. It doesn't lead anywhere good. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I lost my wife and son in an accident 5 years ago. A drunk driver ran a red light. I survived without a scratch. For years, I torture myself with what ifs. What if we'd left 5 minutes earlier or later? What if I'd driven instead of her? What if I'd insisted we stay home that day? But none of those questions changed anything. They just kept me locked in the past, unable to move forward. Maya looked at him with surprise. She'd known he was a widower. It had been in the news, but he'd never talked about it before. The truth is, Ethan continued, you can't control everything. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no one to blame. But what you've done since then, that's a choice. You chose to love her through it. You chose to sacrifice everything to take care of her. That's what matters. Not the accident, but what you did after. Maya started crying then, really crying, the kind of tears she'd been holding back for 3 years. Because she'd been carrying that weight for so long, and no one had ever told her it was okay to put it down. No one had ever said it wasn't her fault. Ethan moved from his chair and knelt beside her, taking her hand gently. You're a good sister, Maya. Better than she could have hoped for. But you need to forgive yourself. You need to let yourself be human, to make mistakes, to not be perfect all the time. Because the person you're punishing with all this guilt isn't the person who caused the accident. It's just you, and you don't deserve that. Maya squeezed his hand, unable to speak, and they stayed like that for a long time. When Lila woke up an hour later, she found them sitting close together, talking softly, and she smiled to herself. She'd seen the way Ethan looked at her sister. She'd seen the way Maya lit up when he visited. And for the first time in years, Lila felt hope. Not just for herself, but for Maya too. In that moment, sitting in that hospital room with the sunset fading outside, something shifted between Maya and Ethan. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. It was quiet, gentle, like two puzzle pieces finally sliding into place. Neither of them said anything about it, but they both felt it. The beginning of something neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. A connection, a friendship, and maybe, just maybe, something more. But not everyone was happy about Ethan's transformation. Derek Morrison had been Ethan's business partner and CFO for 10 years. He was smooth, charming, the kind of man who could sell anything to anyone. He wore expensive suits, drove a Porsche, and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. People in the company either loved him or feared him, and Derek preferred it that way. He'd built his reputation on being untouchable, indispensable, the man who could make the numbers work no matter what. What nobody knew, what Derek had been very careful to hide, was that for the past 3 years he'd been slowly embezzling money from coal enterprises. It had started small, just a few thousand here and there, buried in complicated transactions and shell companies. But as Ethan had checked out emotionally after Sarah's death, Derek had gotten bolder. Hundreds of thousands became millions. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Real estate purchased under false names. A lifestyle that far exceeded what even his generous salary could provide. For years, it had been easy. Ethan had been so consumed by grief, so focused on work as an escape rather than as something to actually pay attention to, that he'd signed off on everything Derek put in front of him. Board meetings were formalities. Financial reviews were rubber stamps. Derek had free rein, and he'd used it to build himself a fortune on the back of Ethan's tragedy. But now, everything was changing. Ethan was waking up. He was asking questions again, reviewing reports with actual attention, challenging decisions he would have approved without thought just months before. Derek could see it happening, could feel the walls closing in. It was only a matter of time before Ethan discovered what he'd done. And when that happened, Derek wouldn't just lose his job. He'd go to prison. So Derek decided to act first. If he couldn't stop Ethan from paying attention, he could at least redirect that attention somewhere else. And he knew exactly where. He started planting seeds of doubt. Casual comments in meetings, spoken with concern and wrapped in fake worry. Ethan's been distracted lately. Haven't you noticed? He'd say to other executives, shaking his head sadly. He's spending so much time with that girl, the waitress. I'm worried about him. I heard she's got serious financial troubles. He'd mentioned to the board members over lunch. Medical bills, debt. You don't think she's taking advantage of him, do you? He's vulnerable right now. It's just strange, isn't it? He'd say to anyone who would listen. This girl returns his wallet, and suddenly he's paying for everything? Her sister's hospital bills, their apartment, everything. How do we know she didn't plan it all? Drop the wallet herself, knowing he'd feel obligated to help. The whisper spread. People started looking at Ethan differently, with pity and concern. They started watching his relationship with Maya, with suspicion. And Derek sat back and watched, knowing he was building the foundation for something bigger. Then Derek made his real move. He doctored financial records to make it look like money was disappearing from one of Ethan's charitable funds, specifically the Sarah Cole Foundation that Ethan had recently established in his late wife's name. It was perfect, Derek thought. Ethan was already emotional about that fund, already protective of Sarah's memory. If it looked like someone was stealing from it, Ethan would be furious. And Derek made it look like Maya was responsible. He created fake bank accounts with information similar to Maya's. He fabricated transaction records showing small withdrawals over several months, carefully timed to coincide with when Ethan had started helping her. He forged documents that made it seem like Maya had access she shouldn't have had. It was elegant, really, untraceable back to him, but damning for her. One morning, Ethan's head of security, Marcus, came to his office with a file. His face was grim, and Ethan felt his stomach drop before Marcus even spoke. "Sir, we found some irregularities in the Sarah Cole Foundation account," Marcus said, placing the file on Ethan's desk. "Withdrawals that don't match our records." Ethan frowned, opening the file. "What kind of withdrawals?" $50,000 over the past 2 months. Small amounts, designed to avoid detection. But they all trace back to an account connected to someone you know. Marcus hesitated. Maya Reyes. Ethan felt like he'd been punched. The air left his lungs. His hands trembled as he looked at the documents, seeing Maya's name, seeing what looked like her bank account information, seeing transaction after transaction. "That's impossible." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I wish it was. But we have the transaction records. Her name, her bank account. The withdrawals started shortly after you began helping her family. I'm sorry, but the evidence is clear." "There has to be an explanation," Ethan said, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. "Maya wouldn't do this." "I understand you become close with her," Marcus said carefully. "But sometimes people aren't who we think they are, especially when money's involved." Ethan stared at the documents, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to dismiss it immediately, to say it was impossible, that Maya was the most honest person he'd ever met. But another part, that old dark part that had been waiting for the world to prove him right, whispered that maybe he'd been fooled. Maybe Derek and the others were right. Maybe she'd seen him as a mark, an easy target, a lonely widower desperate for connection. He thought about how quickly their relationship had developed, how she'd been there at just the right time, returning his wallet when he needed to believe in goodness, how she'd never asked for anything, which had made him want to give her everything. Was that calculated? Had she played him? No. He couldn't believe that. He wouldn't. But the evidence was right there in front of him, in black and white, undeniable. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, staring at the file, trying to make sense of it. He wanted to call Maya, to ask her to explain, but what would he say? How do you ask someone you're falling in love with if they've been stealing from you? By morning, he'd made a decision. He had to confront her. He had to hear her say it, one way or another. He owed her that much at least. He went to Maya's apartment that evening. She'd moved into a better place with the money from the job he'd given her. A small but clean one-bedroom in a safer neighborhood. When she opened the door and saw his face, she knew immediately something was wrong. "Ethan, what happened?" she asked, concern filling her eyes. Ethan held up the file, his hand shaking slightly. "Tell me this isn't true." Maya took the file, confused. As she read through it, her face went pale. Her hands started trembling. "Ethan, I don't understand. I don't even have access to any of your accounts. I've never seen these transactions. Then how do you explain this?" His voice was sharp, hurt in a way that cut through her. "These are your bank accounts, Maya. Your information. Money from Sarah's foundation, from the fund I created to honor my wife and son, going directly to you." I can't explain it because I didn't do it. Maya's voice rose, panic setting in. Ethan, please. You have to believe me. I would never steal from you. I would never dishonor Sarah's memory like that. You know me. I thought I did, Ethan said, and his voice broke. I wanted to believe that you were different, that you were good and honest and real. But maybe I was just seeing what I wanted to see. Maya's eyes filled with tears. You really think I would do this? After everything? After I returned your wallet when I could have kept it? After all the times I've refused your help because I didn't want to take advantage? Maybe that was all part of it, Ethan said, hating himself for the words even as he spoke them. Maybe you were playing a long game, making me trust you, so you could take more later. That's not fair, Maya whispered. You know that's not who I am. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment he wanted to believe her desperately. He wanted to tear up the file, pull her into his arms, and tell her everything would be okay. But that old voice in his head, the one that said the world was cruel and people always disappoint you, it was screaming now. And the evidence was right there, undeniable. I think you should stay away from me and my family's foundation, he said quietly. I won't press charges, but I can't. I can't have you in my life anymore. I need you to understand that. Ethan, Maya reached for him, but he stepped back. Don't, he said. Please just don't. Then he left, walking away from her apartment, from her tears, from everything they'd built together. And with every step, he felt that darkness creeping back in, swallowing the light she'd brought into his life. Maya stood in the doorway, shaking, as Lila came up behind her. Her sister had been in the bedroom, doing homework, but she'd heard everything. What's wrong? Lila asked, putting her hand on Maya's shoulder. Maya couldn't even answer. She just turned and held her sister, sobbing, because the one person who had seen her, really seen her, now thought she was a thief. The one person who'd made her believe she deserved good things had just walked away, and she didn't know how to fix it. Over the next week, everything fell apart. Maya tried calling Ethan, but he wouldn't answer. She tried going to his office, but security had clearly been told to keep her away. They wouldn't even let her into the lobby. She tried sending him messages, emails, anything, but they all went unanswered. She felt like she was drowning, like the ground had opened up beneath her, and she was falling with nothing to catch her. The job Ethan had given her was terminated. A cold email from HR explaining that her position was no longer needed. The money stopped. Not that Maya had been using much of it. She'd been saving most of it for Lila's future medical needs, but the loss of it felt symbolic. She was back to where she started, except now it was worse because she knew what it felt like to have someone believe in her. But something inside Maya refused to give up. She wasn't a thief. She hadn't stolen anything. And if someone had framed her, there had to be a way to prove it. She couldn't let Ethan believe this about her. Not just for her sake, but for his. She'd seen how much lighter he'd become over the past few months, how the darkness had started to lift. If he went back into that place, believing the worst about people, believing he'd been right all along that the world was cruel, she didn't know if he'd ever come out again. She started digging. She took the documents Ethan had shown her, the ones with her supposed bank account information, and went to her actual bank. The manager, a kind woman named Patricia who'd helped Maya open her account years ago, looked at the documents and frowned. Ma'am, this account number doesn't match our system, Patricia said, checking her computer. And this routing number, it's not even for our bank. Someone created a fake trail using information similar to yours, but it's not real. Maya felt a flicker of hope. Can you prove that? Can you give me something in writing? I can give you a letter stating you have no accounts with us matching these transactions, Patricia said. But honey, if someone's good at covering their tracks, you'll need more than that. You'll need to find out who did this and why. Maya took the letter and kept searching. She went back to Cole Enterprises, not to see Ethan, but to talk to people who worked there. She was careful, asking questions that seemed innocent. She talked to assistants, interns, anyone who would speak to her. And slowly, she started to notice a pattern. Derek Morrison's signature was on every approval form for the missing money. He was the one with access to the foundation accounts. He was the one who could move funds without raising immediate alarms. He was the one who'd been asking questions about her, spreading doubts about her character. But Maya knew she couldn't prove it alone. She needed help. She needed someone with resources, someone who could investigate properly. And there was only one person who might believe her, even though it was a long shot. Sarah's mother, Elizabeth Cole. Elizabeth Cole was a woman Ethan rarely talked about. After Sarah died, their relationship had become strained. In her grief, Elizabeth had blamed Ethan for the accident, even though it wasn't his fault. She'd said terrible things in the hospital, things about how if he'd been driving instead of Sarah, maybe he could have done something. She'd said she wished he'd died instead, that at least then Sarah and Daniel would have had a chance. She'd apologized later, of course, written him a letter saying she'd been out of her mind with grief, that she hadn't meant it. But the damage was done. Ethan had pulled away, and they'd barely spoken in 5 years. He'd send her a card on her birthday. She'd send him one on his, but that was the extent of their relationship. But Elizabeth had been watching from a distance. She'd seen her son-in-law turn into a ghost after her daughter's death. She'd seen him build walls so high that no one could reach him. And when she'd heard through mutual friends that he'd started coming back to life, that he'd met someone, she'd felt a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that maybe he could be happy again. Fear that it wouldn't last. Maya found Elizabeth's address through old news articles about the Cole family. She showed up at her door one afternoon, nervous and desperate, not knowing if Elizabeth would even agree to see her. The house was beautiful, a Victorian in an older, elegant part of the city. Maya rang the doorbell with shaking hands, half expecting to be turned away by a housekeeper. But Elizabeth herself answered, an elegant woman in her early 60s with gray hair and Sarah's eyes. "Mrs. Cole, my name is Maya Reyes," Maya said quickly before she lost her nerve. "I need your help. Please. It's about Ethan." Elizabeth looked at her, recognition dawning. "You're the girl. The one he's been seeing." "Was seeing," Maya corrected, her voice breaking, "before someone made him think I was stealing from him. From Sarah's foundation." Elizabeth's expression changed. "Come inside." They sat in Elizabeth's living room, surrounded by photographs of Sarah and Ethan on their wedding day, of Sarah pregnant and glowing. Maya had to swallow hard against the tears, seeing what Ethan had lost, understanding his pain in a way she hadn't before. She told Elizabeth everything. The wallet, the note, the friendship that had grown between them. How Ethan had helped her and Lila, how he'd started to smile again, to laugh, to be present in the world. And then the accusations, the evidence that made no sense, the way he'd looked at her with such hurt and betrayal. Elizabeth listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When Maya finished, the older woman sat back and studied her for a long moment. "Why should I believe you?" Elizabeth asked bluntly. "I don't know you. You could be lying." Maya pulled out the business card, the one she'd taken from Ethan's wallet all those months ago. It was worn now, folded and unfolded hundreds of times, the edges soft and frayed. "Because I kept this to remind myself that choosing honesty over desperation was worth it," Maya said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Even when I had nothing. Even when my sister was sick, and I didn't know how I'd pay for her medication. I didn't take his money then, and I didn't take it now. I don't care if you believe me, Mrs. Cole, but I care that Ethan does. Because I love him. And I can't stand the thought of him going back to that dark place, thinking the worst about people, thinking he was right all along, that the world is cruel and nobody can be trusted." Elizabeth's eyes softened. She recognized something in Maya, something familiar. The same stubborn goodness her daughter Sarah used to have. The same fierce determination to do right even when it cost everything. "All right," Elizabeth said finally. "Let's catch whoever did this." Elizabeth had resources Maya didn't. Money, connections, the kind of power that comes from decades of being part of high society. She hired a private investigator, a man named Thomas who used to work in corporate fraud for the FBI. She explained the situation, showed him the forged documents, gave him everything Maya had gathered. Within 3 days, Thomas had a lead. He came to Elizabeth's house with a thick file and a grim expression. "Derek Morrison has been living beyond his means for years," he said, spreading out photographs and financial records on the dining room table. "A house in the Hamptons, a yacht, luxury cars, private schools for his kids. None of it matches his salary, not even close." "How far beyond?" Elizabeth asked. "Millions," Thomas said. "I found shell companies, offshore accounts, a whole network set up to hide money. He's been embezzling from Cole Enterprises for at least 3 years, maybe longer." And when Ethan started paying attention again, started asking questions, Morrison panicked. Framing Maya was his way of creating a distraction, redirecting Ethan's focus away from the real crime. Maya felt her knees weaken. She sat down hard in one of Elizabeth's expensive chairs. "Can you prove it?" "I can prove enough to interest the authorities," Thomas said. "The rest will come out in the investigation. This isn't the kind of thing you can hide once people start looking in the right places." Elizabeth looked at Maya, then at the evidence spread across her table. "We need to show this to Ethan now." But when they called his office, his assistant said he was in an all-day board meeting. When they tried his cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. Elizabeth decided they couldn't wait. She drove to Cole Enterprises with Maya in the passenger seat, clutching the file like a lifeline. They walked past security like Elizabeth owned the place, which in a way she did. She was family, and no guard was going to stop her. She marched straight to the executive floor, to the boardroom where Ethan was meeting with his directors, and barged in without knocking. "Everyone out," Elizabeth said, her voice commanding. "Now." The board members looked at Ethan, who stared at his former mother-in-law in shock. He hadn't seen her in person in over a year. "Elizabeth, what are you?" "Out," she said again, and something in her tone made the executives gather their papers and leave, filing out with confused glances. When the room was empty, except for Ethan, Elizabeth, and Maya hovering uncertainly in the doorway, Elizabeth threw the file on the conference table. "You're about to make the biggest mistake of your life," she said. Again, Ethan looked at Maya, then at Elizabeth. "I don't understand." "That girl didn't steal from you," Elizabeth said, pointing at Maya. "Derek Morrison did. And if you'd pulled your head out of your own pain for 5 seconds, you would have seen it." She showed him everything. The evidence Thomas had gathered, the offshore accounts, the luxury purchases, Derek's carefully constructed web of fraud. She showed him the letter from Maya's bank, proving the accounts and the forged documents weren't real. She showed him the timeline, how the accusations against Maya had started exactly when Ethan began paying closer attention to company finances. Ethan's face went pale as he read through it all. His hand shook. He sank into a chair, staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language he was struggling to understand. "Derek," he whispered. "Derek did this." "Yes," Elizabeth said. "And he used your grief, your distrust of people, to make you believe it was Maya. He knew you were vulnerable. He knew you were starting to open up again, and that scared him because it meant you might notice what he'd been doing." Ethan looked up at Maya, who was standing by the door with tears streaming down her face. "Maya, I'm so sorry. Where's Derek now?" Elizabeth interrupted. "Because we need to call the police before he realizes we're onto him." But it was too late. Derek had been careful, always careful, and he'd noticed when Elizabeth Cole walked into the building with a woman who looked like Maya Reyes. He'd seen them head to the boardroom, had watched through the window as Elizabeth presented evidence. He was smart enough to know what that meant. By the time security went to find him, Derek's office was empty. His computer had been wiped. His desk drawers were cleaned out. He was gone. It took the police 3 days to find him. He'd gone to his house in the Hamptons, apparently planning to flee the country from a private airstrip nearby. But Thomas had already alerted the authorities, and they were waiting. Derek was arrested without incident, too shocked to even try to run. The evidence was overwhelming. When forensic accountants tore through Cole Enterprises' books, they found years of fraud, millions of dollars stolen and hidden in increasingly complex schemes. Derek had been careful, but not careful enough. The trail was there for anyone who knew where to look. He was charged with embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Ethan, furious at being manipulated and furious at what Derek had done to Maya, refused. The case went to trial. Derek was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. The story made national news. Cole Enterprises' CFO embezzles millions, ran the headlines. There were think pieces about corporate fraud, about how even the most trusted employees could betray you. The company's stock took a hit. Board members resigned. It was a mess. But through it all, Ethan handled it differently than he would have before. He was honest about what had happened. He was transparent with shareholders. He took responsibility for not catching it sooner, for being too checked out to notice. And people respected that. Slowly, the company recovered. But none of that mattered to Ethan as much as what he'd done to Maya. When he went to find her, to apologize properly, she was gone. Her new apartment was empty. The landlord said they'd left 2 days after Derek's arrest, paid up their rent through the end of the month, and didn't leave a forwarding address. Ethan felt panic rising in his chest, a fear he hadn't felt since the night Sarah died. He called her phone. The number was disconnected. He went to the cafe where she used to work. They said she quit weeks ago and hadn't been back. He checked the hospital where Lila had been receiving treatment. They'd been discharged and transferred, but the records were sealed for patient privacy. Maya had disappeared. Ethan sat in his car outside her empty apartment and realized what he'd done. He'd hurt the one person who'd shown him how to feel again. He'd accused her of the worst thing he could imagine, had looked at her with suspicion and doubt when she'd only ever shown him kindness. And now she was gone. He remembered something she'd said once, late one night when they were talking in Lila's hospital room. They'd been discussing sacrifice, what it means to love someone. And Maya had said, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is walk away, if staying means hurting them. She thought she was protecting him. She thought her presence was ruining his life, bringing him nothing but pain and complications. So she'd left. Ethan put his head in his hands, and, for the first time in 5 years, he cried. Really cried. Not the tears he'd shed at Sarah's funeral, controlled and brief, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so deep he didn't know existed. He cried for Sarah and Daniel, for the family he'd lost. He cried for the 5 years he'd wasted being angry at the world. He cried for the way he'd treated Maya, the way he'd thrown away the best thing that had happened to him since the accident. And he cried because he didn't know how to fix it, didn't know if he even could. When he finally stopped, when there were no tears left, he made a decision. He would find her. However long it took, whatever it cost, he would find her and make this right. Ethan became obsessed with finding her. He hired private investigators, plural, the best in the business. He checked hospitals across the state, then across the country. He followed every lead, no matter how thin. He spent hours every day just searching, calling, investigating. Nothing worked. Weeks turned into months. Ethan couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly. He lost weight. His employees noticed, whispered about it. Elizabeth called him regularly, worried. But he couldn't stop, not without knowing Maya was okay. He kept replaying their last conversation, the hurt in her eyes when he'd accused her. He kept thinking about all the things he should have said differently, all the ways he should have trusted her. He kept wondering if she thought about him, if she missed him the way he missed her. One night, sitting alone in his apartment, Ethan found himself in the nursery he'd never converted, the room where he and Sarah had prepared for Daniel. He stood there, surrounded by dusty baby furniture and faded dreams, and he understood something. He'd been punishing himself for surviving. For 5 years, he'd been living but not alive, existing but not thriving, because some part of him felt guilty that he'd lived when they died. And when Maya came into his life, when she showed him it was okay to be happy again, he'd sabotaged it. Because that old guilt, that old belief that he didn't deserve good things, had been waiting for an excuse to prove itself right. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty room, to Sarah's memory, to the son he'd never met. I'm sorry I wasted so much time. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. But I can't keep punishing myself. I can't keep running from happiness because I feel guilty for being alive. You wouldn't want that. Neither of you would want that. It felt like permission, somehow, like Sarah was there in that room with him, telling him it was okay to move on, okay to love again, okay to build a new life. He didn't have to forget her to be happy. He could carry her memory and still move forward. The next morning, Elizabeth called him. I found something, she said, and Ethan could hear the excitement in her voice. A friend of mine volunteers at a clinic 3 hours north, in that small town near the lake. She said a girl and her younger sister came in about a month ago. The description matches Maya and Lila. Ethan was in his car within minutes, not even bothering to change out of his pajamas. He drove north with his heart pounding, hope and fear warring in his chest. What if it wasn't them? What if it was them, but Maya refused to see him? What if he'd broken something that couldn't be fixed? The clinic was small, tucked away in a rural town that looked like something from a postcard. Main Street had a diner, a grocery store, a library. The clinic was a converted house with a hand-painted sign. Ethan parked and walked in, his hands shaking. A nurse at the front desk looked up from her computer. She was middle-aged, friendly-looking, with kind eyes. Can I help you? I'm looking for someone, Ethan said, his voice rough. Maya Reyes. She has a sister, Lila. They might be patients here. The nurse's expression changed, becoming guarded. Are you family? Ethan hesitated. What was he? I'm someone who hurt her, and I need to make it right. Please. I just need to know if she's here, if she's okay. The nurse studied him for a long moment, and Ethan had the feeling she could see right through him, could see all his mistakes and regrets. Finally, she sighed. Room 12, she said. But if you upset her, I'm calling security. We don't have much, but we have enough to remove you. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He walked down the hall, following the room numbers, his heart beating so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. When he reached room 12, he stood outside the door for a moment, gathering his courage. Then he knocked softly. Come in, a weak voice said. He opened the door slowly. The room was small but clean, with afternoon sunlight streaming through a window. And there was Lila, lying in the bed. She looked worse than before, thinner, paler, her skin almost translucent. And in a chair beside her bed was Maya. Maya looked up, and when she saw him, all the color drained from her face. She stood up, so quickly her chair almost fell over. Ethan, she whispered. I'm sorry, he said immediately, the words tumbling out. Maya, I'm so sorry. About everything. I was wrong. I should have believed you. I should have trusted you. I should have. You shouldn't be here, Maya interrupted, shaking her head. She looked scared, but also sad, so incredibly sad. Please, you need to go. I know what happened, Ethan said, taking a step into the room. Derek confessed. He admitted to framing you, to everything. You were right. You were innocent. And I should have known that. I should have trusted you. It doesn't matter now, Maya said, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Don't you see? This is what happens when someone like me gets close to someone like you. Everything falls apart. I'm not good for your life, Ethan. I'm just a reminder of everything you lost, everything that went wrong. You're wrong, Ethan said, his voice breaking. You're the opposite of that. You're a reminder of everything I found, everything good that still exists in this world. You're the reason I started living again, Maya. The reason I remembered what it felt like to be human. Tears rolled down Maya's cheeks. Lila's getting worse. The doctors here say she needs a transplant. We're on a waiting list, but it could take years. We might not have years. I can't ask you for help again. I won't be that person who... You're not asking, Ethan said firmly, crossing the room to stand in front of her. I'm giving, but not because I pity you or feel obligated. Because I love you. Both of you. You're my family now, if you let me be. Maya stared at him, unable to speak. She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it hurt. But she was terrified. Terrified of trusting again, of hoping again, of letting herself be vulnerable when she just barely survived being rejected. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. I don't know if I'm strong enough to risk it again. Then let me be strong for both of us, Ethan said, taking her hand gently. Let me prove to you that I mean it, that I'm not going anywhere, that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the way I hurt you. From the bed, Lila spoke up for the first time, her voice weak but clear. Maya, let him help. Please. Maya looked at her sister, then back at Ethan, and something in her finally broke. She collapsed against him, sobbing, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her like he'd never let go. I'm so sorry, he whispered in her hair, over and over. I'm so sorry. They stood like that for a long time, while Lila watched with tears in her own eyes, feeling the weight of everything they'd all been through. And slowly, very slowly, the pieces started to come back together. But there was something Ethan hadn't told them yet. Something he'd done weeks ago, back when he'd first learned that Lila needed a transplant. He'd gotten tested to see if he was a match. The odds had been slim, the doctors had warned him. Organ matches were difficult, especially when you weren't related. But he'd done it anyway, because he had to do something, had to try. And by some miracle, he was a match. He hadn't told anyone. Not his lawyers. Not Elizabeth. Not even the medical team beyond what was necessary for the procedure. He'd scheduled the surgery for 2 weeks from now, had made all the arrangements, had prepared everything. He was going to donate part of his liver to save Lila's life. But now, standing in this room with Maya in his arms and Lila watching from the bed, he knew he had to tell them. There's something else, he said quietly, pulling back slightly, so he could see Maya's face. I got tested. Back when I first learned Lila needed a transplant. I'm a match. Maya's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Ethan hadn't been holding her. What? She breathed. The surgery's scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Ethan continued. If you'll let me. If Lila will let me. Ethan, you can't. Maya said, her voice rising with panic. That's major surgery. It's dangerous. What if something goes wrong? What if you? Then at least I died doing something that mattered. Ethan said simply. At least I used my life to save someone worth saving. Maya covered her face with her hands, sobbing harder now. She couldn't process it, couldn't understand how this man who she'd hurt, who she thought hated her, had done this, had made himself vulnerable, had literally offered up part of himself to save her sister. From the bed, Lila spoke, her voice trembling. Why would you do this for us? We're nobody. We're nothing to you. Ethan walked over her bedside and knelt down so he was at eye level with the young girl. Because your sister taught me that life is about more than success or money or proving you're strong enough to not need anyone. She taught me that love is the only thing that makes us human, and I don't want to be empty anymore. The surgery took 8 hours. Maya sat in the waiting room, Elizabeth beside her, holding her hand. Every minute felt like an eternity. She kept thinking about how this all started. A wallet on the ground, a choice to do the right thing. And somehow, it led to this moment, where a man who had everything was giving part of himself to save her sister. Finally, a doctor came out, still in his scrubs. The surgery was successful, he said. Both patients are stable. It'll be a long recovery, but they're going to be okay. Maya collapsed into Elizabeth's arms, crying. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come when you've been holding your breath for years and finally, you can breathe again. When they let her see Ethan, he was groggy but awake. His eyes found hers across the room. Hey, he said, his voice rough. Hey, she whispered back, moving to his bedside. She took his hand gently. You're an idiot. You know that. He smiled. I've been told. Why would you risk your life for us? Ethan squeezed her hand weakly. Because 5 years ago, I lost my family, and I thought I'd never feel whole again. But you and Lila, you gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave me hope. How could I not fight for that? Maya leaned down and kissed his forehead. I love you, she whispered. I think I have for a while now. I love you too, Ethan said. And when I get out of here, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it. Hashtag part 16, recovery and rebuilding. The recovery was slow but steady. Lila's body accepted the transplant beautifully. Within weeks, color returned to her cheeks. Her energy came back. The doctor said she'd need medication for life, but she would live a full, normal life. Ethan's recovery took longer. The surgery had been hard on him, and complications kept him in the hospital for an extra 2 weeks. But Maya was there every day, reading to him, talking to him, just being present. And slowly he healed. Derek's trial made national news. The evidence was overwhelming, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Ethan's company took a hit in the press, but Ethan handled it differently than he would have before. He was honest, transparent, and took responsibility for not catching it sooner. People respected that. And something else changed too. Ethan started using his wealth differently. He expanded the Sarah Cole Foundation, funding medical care for families who couldn't afford it. He hired Maya to run the program, not because she needed a job, but because she understood what it meant to struggle. She was perfect for it. Hashtag part 17, the proposal. 6 months after the surgery, Ethan took Maya back to the place where it all started. The street corner where she'd found his wallet. It was evening, the streetlights glowing softly just like that night. Why are we here? Maya asked, confused. Ethan smiled and pulled something from his pocket. A black leather wallet, but not his original one. This one was new, and when he handed it to her, she opened it curiously. Inside was a note, just like the one she'd written, but this one was in Ethan's handwriting. It read, Asterisk, you gave me back more than my wallet that day. You gave me back my life, my heart, and my faith in people. I don't have much to offer except everything I am. Will you marry me? Asterisk. Maya looked up, tears streaming down her face, and Ethan was kneeling in front of her, holding a simple ring. I'm not perfect, he said. I'm still learning how to be the man you see in me. But I promise I'll spend every day trying. Will you marry me, Maya? She couldn't speak, so she just nodded. Yes, yes, yes. He slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. They stood there under the streetlights, holding each other, and for the first time in either of their lives, everything felt right. Hashtag part 18. The wedding. They got married in a small ceremony 6 months later. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, just close friends and family in a garden behind Elizabeth's house. Lila was Maya's maid of honor, healthy and glowing, and so happy she couldn't stop smiling. Elizabeth walked Ethan down the aisle, something Sarah's mother had insisted on. You're my son, she told him. In every way that matters. When Maya walked down the aisle, Ethan felt his breath catch. She was wearing a simple white dress, her hair down, no veil. She looked like herself, and that was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The officiant kept it short. When it came time for vows, Ethan went first. Maya, before I met you, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd already had my chance at happiness and lost it. But you showed me that life doesn't end when we lose something. It just changes. You taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to hope again. And I promise to honor that gift every single day for the rest of my life. Maya wiped her tears and took a breath before speaking. Ethan, I spent years thinking I didn't deserve good things, that I had to earn love through sacrifice and pain. But you showed me that love isn't something you earn. It's something you receive when you're brave enough to be yourself. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, and you loved me not despite my struggles, but with them. I promise to stand by your side, in good times and bad, and to remind you every day that you are so much more than you think you are. When they kissed, everyone cheered. But for Ethan and Maya, the rest of the world faded away. It was just them, together, finally whole. Hashtag part 19. 5 years later. Life didn't become perfect after that. Life never is. There were hard days. Days when Ethan's old darkness crept back in and Maya had to remind him that it was okay to feel sad, that healing isn't linear. Days when Maya's guilt about the accident returned and Ethan had to hold her and tell her it wasn't her fault. But they faced those days together. Lila graduated from college with honors and started working at the foundation alongside Maya. She was healthy, thriving, living the life Maya had fought so hard to give her. The foundation grew beyond anything they'd imagined. They helped thousands of families afford medical care, and every year on the anniversary of the day Maya returned the wallet, they held a charity gala to raise even more funds. Ethan never went back to being the cold, ruthless businessman he once was. He was still successful, but now his success had purpose. He used his platform to talk about mental health, grief, and the importance of choosing kindness. And Maya, the girl who once thought she was invisible, became the heart of everything they built. She ran programs, met with families, and never forgot what it felt like to struggle. That empathy made her incredible at her job. One evening, they were sitting on the porch of their house, watching the sunset. Lila was inside making dinner, and their dog, a rescue they'd adopted 2 years ago, was asleep at their feet. Do you ever think about that night? Maya asked softly. When I found your wallet. Ethan smiled. Every day. Do you regret it? The test. Dropping all those wallets trying to prove people were bad. Ethan thought about it. No, because if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have found you. Sometimes our darkest moments lead us exactly where we need to be. Maya leaned her head on his shoulder. I used to think I was saving you, but I think you saved me too. We saved each other, Ethan said simply. And that was the truth.